Okay, we'll get started. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Callie Marshall from the Buren Conservation District, and I'd like to welcome you all to our fourth annual Backyard Symposium. This series is designed to connect folks with the natural world around them. This year, we're focusing on farming and gardening. From backyards to farm fields, our speakers will talk about resources and support for farming and gardening and how you can produce food regardless of land size and more. In the chat, please feel free to introduce yourself and share what you would like to learn. And feel free to interact with the speaker in the presentation through the chat, as well as the Q&A. Okay, so just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Again, we'd like to welcome you to the Backyard Symposium. Today we're here for community gardens. We'd love for you to connect with us on our website at vanburencd.org. You can also reach us on our social media, on our Facebook at vanburencd. This webinar is also going to be recorded. Recorded webinars will be posted next week on our YouTube channel, Van Buren CD. Live captioning is also available. In order to ask and answer questions, we do have the chat available for everyone, as well as the Q&A icon that should be located in the bottom of your screen. We'll hold questions for Ms. Daywi until the end of the presentation. To reach out to the VBCD moderator, myself, you can use the chat function, or for Zoom help, use the help function on the Zoom app. All right, so I'm excited to introduce our speaker today, Miss Daywi Cook. She is the Covert Township Supervisor and the co-creator of the Covert Community Garden. Ms. Cook has led efforts in development of outdoor recreation and creating community spaces during her time in public office. In addition to being an avid gardener, Ms. Cook enjoys creating fresh meals and desserts from the homestead and foraging the backwoods with her 2 young kids and husband. So with that, please welcome Ms. Daywi Cook.
Thanks, Callie. I will see if I can share my screen to get my presentation up for you. Okay. And here we are. How does that look? Okay. So welcome, and thank you to the Van Buren Conservation District. We're here today basically to guide people through a process on how to begin and organize a public garden in our own communities. We'll explore a little bit of the history of community gardens, the various motivations and goals that drive these efforts, and how to choose a site and multiple methods of funding and managing a public garden. Kelly already introduced me, but so I serve on all sorts of different boards and committees that basically support the development of outdoor recreation and creating community spaces. So I'm on the Van Buren Park Commission, and I'm also on the Economic Development Corporation for Van Buren County. And we've been longtime residents of our small township here in Covert, Michigan. We're actually celebrating 100 years since my great-grandparents immigrated here from Poland. So I'm really grateful that I get to live on our old homestead, and there's some old apple orchards out there. And so gardening has been in my blood for quite some time. And I am an avid homesteader. I say I am, but it's a constant evolution where we keep adding new projects and just trying to be sustainable. So I want to start by defining a community garden because it can take on a lot of different shapes. There are some really broad definitions out there, including from the American Community Gardening Association. And basically, it can be urban, suburban, rural. It can grow all sorts of things, flowers, vegetables, and it can be one community plot, many different plots, and it can be located at many different places, whether a school or a hospital or a neighborhood. And there really are just community managed open spaces. So it can take the shape of whatever it is that the residents and volunteers desire. But I wanted to talk about the historical significance of community gardens, mainly to show that they've been around for a very long time. And often it is to fill a need. So Michigan really was in the forefront of creating these gardens back in the late 19 or 1800s. They in Detroit, actually, their mayor started what they call the Pingree's potato patches. So during a financial recession in Detroit, they actually instituted public gardens to be cultivated and by the residents and supported by the city. So the startup of that particular project was actually funded a lot by the mayor, but then also by um, taxpayer money and a lot of donations. So it was actually the whole idea was ridiculed, but by 1897, that program reached its peak with 1,500 families participating. And then it began to taper off as economic conditions improved. It was revived again in the Great Depression. And then we also saw urban farming in Detroit take another resurgence during a recession in 2008. And of course, during war times, a lot of people are familiar with Victory Gardens. So in World War I, those were actually called war gardens. And then they changed it to Victory Gardens as the war started to look good for the United States. And really, it was to supply people with food. I mean, it was a really basic need that needed to happen again. And you're seeing it happen during either economic recessions, but then also during breakdowns in food supply chains. And not to mention, a lot of farmers were actually off to war. A lot of women ended up in the fields to help educate and support, food production. So you'll see in the United States School Garden Army, where 2.5 million children were actually enrolled. And we actually became the leader in seed production in the world during that period of time. During World War II, we supplied about 40% of the produce in the United States. And then you'll also see our First Lady planted their own Victory Garden at the White House. School gardens have also been a popular thing in the United States, especially during the progressive era of the early 20th century. That's when there was a lot of political reform. They were focused on, defeating corruption and minimizing waste and inefficiencies. So gardens were seen as a way to get city children out of crowded and unhealthy environments and teach them to appreciate nature and instill a sense of civic responsibility. That school gardening movement continued, especially, during the war, as I said earlier, and throughout the urban community gardening movements. And of course, most recently, the First Lady, Michelle Obama, actually put another garden in at the White House, and that was mainly to combat childhood obesity. So there's a lot of different reasons why community gardens have a resurgence in different communities. And I really just wanted to, highlight historically what we've done in the United States. So when we think about community gardens today, we talked about historically why they've existed, but then we can talk about why someone might want to create one in their community. So one is to reduce the environmental impact of importing food and industrial farming. We have seen, there's quite a lot that goes on with industrial farming that can be very wasteful. Not to mention, we're not always certain about where our food is coming from and what kind of journey it took to get there, to get on your plate. So there's a lot of people who are very conscious about wanting to know those things and really just to decrease their carbon impact on the environment. It's also to provide underserved communities and food deserts with fresh produce. So In the United States, especially in those lower income communities, we see less access to fresh produce, provide food security during supply chain uncertainty. So we saw that during most recently the COVID-19 pandemic, where we saw a breakdown in that supply chain, and it included food. So we saw another resurgence of community gardens and just at home homesteading and gardening. And then it's also a great space to share and to learn. So, especially in Covert Township, we really focused on teaching each other. So, even though we're a very rural community and we have a lot of farms and we have a lot of multi-generational families who grew up on farms, we found that there was a beautiful mix of very seasoned gardeners, but then also novice gardeners who have moved to the area with the desire to homestead. So we found this to be a really great space to share not only resources like equipment and tractors, and but also knowledge on what's available in the area and what grows here. So every climate's going to be very different. And so though, and exchanging seeds, that was huge for us too, and plants. And then of course, beautification and utilization of barren spaces. So especially in Detroit during the recession, when we saw a lot of foreclosed buildings and homes, that played a big part in the urban gardening movement that happened during the recession in 2008, especially. So I put a definition for food sovereignty up here. This is a term that's used particularly among the Native American populations in America. So it kind of talks about the historical significance of it, I guess, would be the fact that Native Americans have historically been pushed out of the most fertile and I guess the most fertile parts of the country. So they end up in deserts where it is very difficult to have sustainable lifestyles and to grow their own food. So food sovereignty is defined here as the right of peoples to healthy and culturally appropriate food produced through ecologically sound and sustainable methods, and their right to define their own food and agricultural systems. So it really creates more food security. It allows for people to be able to grow their own food and grow the food that's appropriate for the climate and their culture. Okay, so I am not necessarily going to teach anybody how to garden, but what I am going to do is share our experience with the Covert Community Garden, how we got started, to guide and create steps on how to establish your own in your own community. So the steps are here. Step 1, garner interest and identify main goals. Step 2, identify potential sites. Step 3, establish order and structure. Step 4, plan and identify resources. And step 5, seek funding. Step 6, implement the plan. So our journey was a long one. It took about a year from talking about it, step 1, to getting all the way through step 6. So I'm going to go through each and every one of these and give you an idea as to how we were able to navigate them. So step 1, garnering interest and identifying main goals. Start talking to everyone. You start with your friends and your family and your neighbors, but then also, go to libraries, talk to your post office master, talk to your community leaders, show up at PTAs. And what you'll find is eventually enough people will be interested in it and actually commit. So in the beginning, you're not organized. You're not really sure what you want to do. You might have an idea. And as you start talking to more people and then actually meeting with them, and it's important to keep a really good roster of names and contact information so that you're always keeping in contact with these people who say they're very interested. And then start meeting. You're going to have a lot of meetings and advertise these meetings. So put up flyers at your library or and anywhere that's appropriate. Maybe there's some local businesses with community bulletin boards or even your local township hall. And you can even start a social media page get it out there so that people know, oh, they're meeting about something. You can start vague. You don't have to be specific. I think ours was, do you want to start a community garden? If so, show up, we'll exchange seeds, and we'll talk about what we can do here in Covert Township. So with me, I've been talking about a community garden for many years, ever since I moved back home here. And eventually, actually, one of the pages at the library said, hey, Daywi, let's just do this. What do we need to do to get this rolling? I think we have enough people. So we actually just started meeting at the library, and we called it the Garden Club. And eventually we had enough. I mean, for us, our community is so small. We had anywhere between 3 people show up at any given time to, I think at the most, maybe around 10, which I found to be a success. I mean, I'll take whatever I can at this point. And we just started talking. We're talking about what we are passionate about when it comes to gardening, what it is we want to do in this community. And that's how you start identifying those common goals and priorities. We had a lot of work sessions where we had many different ideas, and basically we had to whittle it down to what are our high level priorities that we want to do now, knowing that in the future we could possibly branch out and do more. And it's also a good time to start identifying resources, because these folks that you're talking to, they might have a whole pile of mulch that they just don't need anymore, or plenty of composted chicken manure that we can use as fertilizer. That's what we were finding, especially in these rural areas where we do have a lot of farmers. We have a lot of hobby farmers, but then also just like landscapers or just woodworkers. We have a lot of people in those sort of trades. So they had a lot of extra supplies that they were willing to donate. So as you start to garner interest in identifying those main goals, start formulating your mission statement. Ours is up here for you to look at. It looks long-winded. It's because we really wanted to make sure we encapsulated everything that we wanted to accomplish here. And this is important not just for our own guidance, but also if we start asking for donations or we want to start partnering with other organizations, they're going to ask these questions. What is it that you want to do? We may not have an exact criteria or schedule of programming or, a whole conceptual plan yet or a whole budget yet, but at least we have an idea as to what it is we're trying to accomplish. Okay. So step 2, selecting a site for your garden. So this can happen really, it doesn't have to be a step 2 or a 3 or a 4. It might take a while before you actually find a site that you are happy with, for a number of reasons. But the basics when you're selecting a site, right, is you have to make sure that the needs of your garden are met. So we're talking about sunlight, access to water, making sure it's not too windy. Of course, checking the soil quality. Perhaps if you're having raised garden beds, that may not matter, but think about drainage. And then, of course, if we do want to make this as accessible to the community as possible, consider walkability, proximity to other public spaces, just general accessibility. So think sidewalks, parking, public transportation. And then as you start narrowing down the location, look at some of the properties that are available. So the easiest ones for us to locate would be the ones that were owned by townships. So those publicly owned spaces that are underutilized and also have, all of our other criteria. Those are the easiest ones to identify. And then if you really can't find any, think about some of the private properties that are out there and maybe start talking to some property owners to see if they're willing to either lease or, lend the property over for the use of a community garden in some way. And of course, look at the history of the property in case of possible contamination. Okay. So as you start narrowing down your location and your site and what it is that you really want to do, it's time to really start establishing some real order and structure so that the decision-making process is transparent and you can start accepting donations. You might want to think about insurance and liability, that sort of thing. And that can be overwhelming, especially if you're trying to do this from the ground up. So, what I would advise is to try and find existing organizations in which their goals align with yours, or maybe they would be willing to take it on as a new, as a good new program. Like volunteer organizations, other non-for-profits that are in your community. So even local municipalities, I did research, I'm in an advantage or in a good position to be able to, talk to legal about this and see if municipalities can even support this. And so I went through that journey and spoke with our attorneys just to see what does this look like? And it can look like a lot of different things. So um it may, one size doesn't fit all. What we ended up doing was the garden club created a proposal and with our mission statement got as close to what we would consider a phase one budget as we possibly could with conceptual design and everything. And over numerous meetings, presented it to our township board in order to utilize a vacant township piece of property, but then also allow us to be able to take in donations through the township, since this is an allowable expense through our township. We really didn't want to spend taxpayer money on this. We wanted this to be something that was supported by the community and local businesses and organizations and foundations. So we went that route and it worked for us. They eventually approved the whole concept and established an advisory committee in which they appointed, the township board appointed members, and that advisory committee would then had their own bylaws, designated roles. So, the chairperson, the secretary, and the treasurer are the main ones. We had 5 people on our committee. And we would recommend the rules and regulations for visitors in the garden. We helped figure out criteria for volunteers, schedule volunteer days and decide when we're going to meet and where. And so all of that was defined as with the township in order to have transparency in how decisions were going to be made, but then also to legally be able to handle donations, monetary donations, material donations, and where do we store them? And then how do we utilize the space? We were also able to be under their liability insurance with our volunteers. So that helped a lot as well. So this was an excerpt from an article that I found. The Michigan Township Association has a monthly magazine that comes out. And this was really refreshing for me. I really wasn't sure under what law and how township would be able to support a community garden, but we have found that historically municipalities have been doing that. So, and I'll read this. It says townships are authorized to adopt ordinances to regulate and protect public health, safety, and welfare. A township may also establish parks and places for public recreation. Community gardens can serve to advance both goals. And so for this reason, community gardens can be planted on township land as the land is being used to advance legitimate township objectives. So we really kind of honed in on that. We were also very fortunate that the local branch library was willing to partner with us on the programming. So we had ideas for programming that for years worth of programming. You can get really creative with, different methods of planting, or teaching people how to, grow under row covers. we had ideas to bring in, experts and have work sessions. And so the library was very open in letting us know that, they have a limited programming budget, but we can use the space as we need to on a monthly basis. So I did touch on how the covert community garden came to fruition. So it really did happen. I mean, this was in spring of 2022, really, was when we first started talking about it and trying to figure out how do we even make this happen. Like I said, we were meeting at the Covert Branch Library monthly. We were advertising it. And lucky for us, we already sort of had a site in mind because right next to the library was a barren lot that used to be a playground. And we looked at the sunlight there and everything, and it was a perfect candidate. So, like I said, the library agreed to support the garden club. We presented the proposal to township, and it wasn't until really like April 2023 that it was fully approved by township to the point where we could start digging in the ground. And for us, that seemed really late in the season, but we just took it as an opportunity to learn about what it's like to grow food late in season. What are those crops that will grow quickly? What are the ones that don't mind some frost late in the season? So we just took it as a challenge, but an opportunity also to learn. So how we manage, I did touch on that. Covert Township Board is basically the main management organization of the community garden. The municipality is, but they've appointed a committee to advise it. And then within that committee, we've appointed 2 garden managers. So these folks essentially, they do a number of things. They organize the volunteers, they organize the volunteer days, but then they also decide what will and will not be grown in the garden. Mainly because we didn't want different crops competing with each other. So we did a lot of research on companion planting and also, seasonal planting. So we wanted to make sure that everybody played well together, basically. And so they organize that and oversee the volunteers, and then also help oversee the garden club programming and any other special events that we may host via the community garden. Okay, step 4, plan and identify resources. So throughout this entire process, you're always thinking, what are my resources? So now that you've pretty much got an idea of what you want to do, how you're organized, and how you're going to make decisions, now you can start really collecting those resources and really trying to figure out a budget. And this is important when you're asking for money. They're going to want to know exactly what you're going to do with that money. So this is really when these ideas really get on paper. And then you can use this as an opportunity to refine that mission statement, make sure that the goals that you had in the beginning of this process are still relevant. Definitely delegate tasks. Don't try to do this all on your own. If you have a nice group of people to help you, draw up some concepts and list all the materials that you need. Get online, do some research, figure out what material that you have available to you to be donated from various residents and farmers and maybe even local businesses. And then create a list of those that you still need, how much they cost. And that's really where those monetary donations are going to come into play. Also consider, educational programming and resources that are out there for free that might help guide you throughout this entire process. And if there are any existing volunteer organizations that can help you, especially when it comes to the actual labor involved in establishing this down the road. So our focus, covert community, was to create a food pantry garden. So, and this was to not only educate visitors and members on how to grow plants, but also supply fresh local produce to our community. So, I don't know that we are actually defined as a food desert necessarily in Covert, but we do have the closest grocery store is 10 miles out into, our neighboring city. And it wasn't until just a few years ago, we did not have access to fresh produce within our community. So actually, our local Dollar General now has produce, which they did not have when I first moved back here 10 years ago. So, and I think that just started about 4 years ago, where they started offering fresh produce. And for a farming community, I was really surprised. I grew up with a farm stand across the street from me that has been closed for many years now, unfortunately. So we just don't see that. And we have a farmers market in South Haven twice a week, which is great. But with the amount of farming that we have here in Covert, it surprises a lot of people that we don't have our own farmers market right here in our own community. So we have, like I said before, we've got a lot of really great seasoned gardeners that have grown their own food for many, many years. And then we have some folks who don't, and they don't know even where to get that fresh produce. So there's a disconnect somehow in this community, and that we're really trying to get back to our roots. We're trying to get back to sharing. We're trying to figure out eventually we would really like to have a farmer's market here. But in the meantime, we wanted a space where people could cultivate food and then they could come and harvest it anytime they want. We had some people asking, well, gosh, what if somebody just comes in and takes all your food? I'm like, if they need that food, I'm okay with that. We did draw up some rules and regulations that guided people on what we thought would be an appropriate amount of food, enough for your household. But that was our main goal. And so we didn't go the route with having private plots for people to cultivate, simply because a lot of folks here have a lot of land. So that wasn't the issue. The issue really was even knowing when to get started, or maybe we had some people who are physically incapable of gardening, but really still want fresh produce and have other barriers that keep them from having their own garden at home. Okay, step 5, seek funding and materials. So we've been talking about resources throughout this entire thing. This is where you actually can start stockpiling your material somewhere. One of the reasons we really liked having township be in charge of all of this is that they did have space to store things. So keep that in mind, when you start asking for things like lumber to build boxes, or yards of mulch or soil, where are you going to keep it? Where, make sure you have that all coordinated in your literature. And so you can see there where we have a flyer that we distributed throughout the community on how they can donate or volunteer their time to the community garden. Look at your local foundations, look at other volunteer organizations, corporate sponsors. There are even some state and federal grants out there, local farmers and businesses. And like I said, establish a method for collecting those donations. So with it being through the township, that was helpful. We have a treasurer who collects payments and keeps track of all of the donations in a completely separate account. And that way we always know how much money we have. We were very fortunate that Covert Community Foundation for us donated $3,000 for our first phase. We got $500 from our Covert Lions organization. And then we got about $500 in just personal donations, monetary donations. And then about $1,000 worth of material was donated. So we were very fortunate that one resident with a sawmill who had a lot of extra logs was willing to saw those for us and get them in a place where we could make boxes out of them for our raised garden beds. I knew the soil in that space was not ideal. So we knew right off the bat that we were going to have beds and we were going to figure out how to fill them. So we knew that that was going to be part of our budget. Okay. Step 6, implement the plan. So I didn't really put anything on this slide other than some visuals of people getting to work. And that's because it's going to look different based on what it is you're going to do. If you've done all the steps before this, you've pretty much got a good idea as to where to get started and how to make decisions and how to collect materials and how to use monetary donations. So for us, so I'm one of the garden managers, and the my partner Becca is the other garden manager. So her and I, we went out, and that's her spray painting the ground and measuring out all the boxes. So her and I went out and measured out where we were going to put all of the raised garden beds. It was decided for proper drainage to line the bottom with some rock. And then we had a local blueberry farm that had a lot of extra cuttings to use to fill those boxes at the bottom. Soil was very expensive. We found a beautiful composted topsoil from our local landscaping company, but to fill those boxes was going to cost a lot of money. So we know that using organic material that's not contaminated, we preferred to do that to fill up the boxes about halfway, and then we filled the rest with that composted topsoil. And our garden grew. I mean, we didn't get any plants in the ground until I think it was early June. And for a lot of us, we felt like that was late. But they grew so very quickly with that soil. It was amazing. And then you can see those are actually my kids. Sealing the wood, we definitely wanted to make sure to seal it because this is untreated wood that this gentleman just had on his property and was able to donate. We found mulch, piles and piles of mulch at a local blueberry farm that we were able to use. And then we purchased posts to anchor each of the boxes. And we used cardboard to lay down to just suppress all the weeds and throughout the pathways. And the cardboard just came from the local Dollar General. They let us just grab what we could out of their recycling bin. And luckily it was right down the road. So we just took a few trips and was able to use that to line our pathways. Now, of course, that was just phase 1. And then once we got the garden going, we really, and throughout the whole process, we really had to make sure we kept people engaged. Every once in a while, especially so our location was really great. It was right downtown. So whenever anybody would walk by, they would ask, "What are you doing?" And in some cases, they would run back, get their gloves, and start helping us, which is amazing. So always keep volunteer waiver forms on hand, blank ones, because people just show up and it's great. And so we just want to make sure that everybody's working safely and understand the liability risks, especially when they start handling heavy equipment or, even carrying things that are heavy. Anything can happen, but it's really important to be consistent. So holding those regular monthly meetings. We went on break for 2 months. So we're starting our next meeting here at the end of February. And then that's when we start establishing, once we actually, the weather starts to break and we're getting our beds ready to start planting again, then we make sure to have regular volunteer work days based on everyone's availability and advertising those through social media and flyers. And any way that you can send updates on a regular basis, that just to keep people engaged, even if they're not responding. You've got those folks who say, "I love this idea, but I'm just not available." Well, schedules change sometimes, and think about how to be flexible. And I always let them know, look, no pressure. If you want to stay on this list, we'll keep you on this list, but we really want people to we really want to meet people where they are. We want to make sure that we're always here and available whenever somebody is willing to pitch in, or maybe they can't pitch in and they just want fresh produce, and that's okay. Um, and we really try to create programming for all ages. So kids are very much welcome in the garden. Um, in fact, it's encouraged. I love it. They love eating right out of the garden and learning how to plant. We established a seed library. So we found out that there are quite a few people in our community who already store seeds and collect seeds every year and learn some really great methods on how to do that. Every plant's a little bit different. Um, so we have that available for anybody who just wants some seeds. And then we celebrated the harvest with an event at the end of the year. So we actually had a pumpkin pie contest that was very well attended, and a bunch of different activities for kids and face painting and that kind of thing. It really is just an opportunity to get together as a community and um, just recap and reminisce about how the season went. And other ways to keep your community engaged is getting those expert guests in here. Van Buren Conservation District is a great resource. They also just helped us distribute some educational material, about pollinators and how to garden and all of that good stuff. And that's about it. I think what I said earlier about once you get through those steps, that you kind of have to keep repeating those last few steps, because as your garden grows, you're going to have different ideas on what you want to do. You might want to start putting in new equipment, but having those budgets available and having a good narrative to talk to your donors about that is really important. So, okay.
Thank you, Daywi. That was some really great information. I love how you talked about the sustainability that this has created. We did have a question, so if you're willing to take some questions, and
Of course.
please, anybody in attendance, please feel free to ask questions in the chat and the Q&A function. That first question we have is, they have a problem with produce being picked before it's ready. What do you do? Said that they have had steaks with not ready yet to put in the raised beds, but it isn't helping the issue.
Yeah. It's hard for me to tell when somebody is picking produce that isn't ready yet, or if a bunny got it, or anything else I don't know. So, I think it's a great idea that you made steaks that say they're not ready yet, having something in the rules and regulations also. Um, Gosh, if they're just wiping out your garden, that's unfortunate. But I guess, and I know this doesn't really help, but I've always said have enough to share. Because I have a bunny problem. So I don't have the greenest thumb, believe it or not, but I am what I call a prolific gardener. So I always have backstock just in case my little seedlings get eaten up by the bunnies right away. So just trying to have enough out there so that there's plenty to share in case people if they pick them because they're not before they're ready, they're still going to pick them even when they are ready, I'm going to assume. So I don't know if that helps, but
That, I can't imagine how difficult that would be. I've seen my fair share of bunnies in my yard, so I haven't tempted the garden, but my neighbors always complained.
yeah.
I also really loved how you talked about how little to how many people you could have. It doesn't take a big crowd to get started. But I really love the perseverance in your story in Covert.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. It's easy to get discouraged because I've gone down paths where we just did not have enough support. And then you just have to be willing to say that, okay, well, this is not going to happen right now. Let's put a pin in it and maybe the support will come later. So, and it did, but it took a while. I see we have a few more questions. I see Brenda's question, what is a good size area to start with? We have access to a 50 by 50 foot area. I love a good challenge. So, and I am a very resourceful person. I work with what I have. So, and I lived in Chicago for quite a while, and I know what it's like to try to garden in a small space and a large space, and I'm a real big fan of vertical gardening. So, it really just depends on what your intentions are, how much food you're intending to grow, I guess, for and what kind of food. Um, and you could have more than one space. So maybe you utilize that space, and then you find a bigger one, and then you have a spillover space. So I would say work with what you have, and just don't be intimidated by it. How big is ours? I'm trying to think. We have 9 boxes, I believe, that are 8 by 4. And we grew a lot of food in those. And I'm already thinking I want more, but we're trying to think about how do we grow vertically without having to build more boxes. So, and that, that's not, we're not a big community, but we definitely had people come in and harvest regularly, which I loved. I was so happy to come back and see that all the peppers were picked or all the tomatoes were picked. I mean, somebody's making good use of them. Okay, Carol, might some of this be applicable to wildflower gardens? Absolutely. So we actually dedicated 1 box just to wildflowers to help attract pollinators. And I know in South Haven, they have a garden club. And when we were doing our research, they were very open with us and said, you know what, that's not exactly what we do. Because I thought maybe it was something that they could do on behalf of Covert, or we could move out this way, but they're very much more focused on beautification. They do have a food garden in South Haven also, but they're in beautification efforts. You could do, cuttings for local hospitals, or even you could have pots and plots throughout your whole downtown area. It doesn't have to just be in one space. So you can absolutely apply this to wildflower gardens. And then we have what would you do for having a wait list of participants? Okay. That is a great problem to have. I had an organization reach out to me and say, we connect people with community projects. Is this something that you think that we would be able to do for you? And I never say no. But our garden, once it was up and going, didn't take a lot to keep. And, just making sure it got watered during those dry days and weeded and tended to every once in a while. So we really didn't even have to tap into it. But then if you have those regular programs where you are workshopping or building something, invite everybody out. And if not everybody can be involved, then, they can at least witness or take notes or, do something. So I don't say no to people. I keep everyone on a list. And whenever we have events, we let everybody know that these events are happening. So yeah. Okay. So Heather, I am part of the South Haven Community Garden. I put in a pollinator garden at the very beginning, or setting up the garden. It's in the back corner. We did try to grow flowers for hospice for 1 season in 1 box, but they weren't being used. Oh, okay. Yeah, and that's okay. Like, that's an example of a program that, it sounded like it made sense at the time, and if it's just not being used, that's okay. And honestly, it's pretty, I know that sounds silly, but we didn't use our wildflowers for anything other than the pollinators, and every once in a while we pick bouquets for our own personal homes. But And that's okay. And at least then for us, because we're highly focused on education, we learned about what kind of wildflowers grow in our area. So. Okay.
Awesome. Well, unless anybody else has any questions, I hear some great comments. You know, everybody seems to be really inspired by what you've had to say, Daywi. So thank you so much for joining us. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, just thank you so much. I really am grateful that you thought of Covert for this presentation. You know, I'm not an expert in gardening or anything really. I never feel like I'm an expert in anything, but at least this can share, I can share our experience to hopefully inspire others and know that this is attainable. It can just take some time. You know, don't get discouraged. It takes time to get people together with these sort of projects.
Absolutely. Well, and again, we really appreciate your time. Oh, looks like we have one last question come in too, from Heather. Can you share your garden address so that they can visit?
Oh, of course. Gosh, what is the actual address? Because it's just a vacant lot. It's just north of our Covert Branch Library in Covert Township. So I can look it up.
And it's located right on 140.
It's right on M140. Okay. And I can type the answer. I don't know if this is 33805 M140 is the library. And it's the lot just north of it.
Thank you for sharing that. And then I'm just going to share our information for tomorrow. Again, thank you so much, Daywi. We really appreciate your time. It was great having you with us today.
Thank you so much, Kelly.
Yeah.
Have a good day.
You too. Thank you. And thank you to everybody for attending this day's session. And we'll hope you'll join us for more. And please feel free to contact us on our website, on our social media. And these videos will be posted on YouTube. Tomorrow, Gabe Francisco will be presenting on backyard poultry. Same time, same email link. So please join us.